Thank you very much. Indeed, being the first speaker after the lunch is a challenge. I'll do my best to keep your attention. So, good afternoon. Today I will talk about the road to alternative fuels and what it will take for shipping to achieve the net zero greenhouse gas emissions targets. So, anybody feeling like this captain here, having to face all the environmental regulations coming up? During the last years, we have heard several information about decarbonization, alternative fuels. We have seen feasibility studies, insightful comparisons between fuels, but we're wondering, is it actually a competition between alternative fuels? Are we actually looking for a specific alternative fuel that will replace oil once and for all? Or is it going to be a mix of fuels? Is it going to take a team effort that everybody needs to collaborate within and outside the shipping industry? Hopefully we will not leave the captain sail by himself. For shipping, it all started with this famous diagram of the IMO strategy on greenhouse gas emissions, which, subject to its revision during this crucial year in 2023, it may end up with a target of 100% net zero greenhouse gas reduction until 2050. So for the time being, we have seen several ways in order to reduce the energy consumption of vessels, but inevitably, sooner or later, and definitely in the long run, it is a common agreement that there will be no other alternative than shipping switching to alternative fuels. But what are these fuel options that we have? If we see the table of carbon-based fuels, we will need to go all the way to the left, where we have the fuels with the lowest carbon content. There we find LNG and LPG, as well as methanol and biofuels, as the percentage of the biocomponent increases. But as we are speaking about carbon-free alternative fuels, we need to look also outside this table to elements such as ammonia and hydrogen as possible alternative fuels. So what is the best alternative fuel option? This is the million-dollar question, right? Unfortunately, I don't have the answer, simply because this is not the right question to ask. Instead, we need to ask 3 questions for each fuel. Is it fit for onboard use? Is it available to ships? Is it actually commercially available? And last but not least, is it well-to-wake carbon neutral? So in order to replace the fuel oil that we currently use on board the ships with an alternative fuel, we need to have an engine, an energy consumer that can do that. We need to have suitable distribution and storage systems on board, as well as a rigid regulatory framework in order to ensure the safety in such an operation. For the time being, we have LNG and LPG, which are well-established technologies, and during the last years, expanding more and more to ship types other than the standard LNG and LPG carriers that we see them. And also we have methanol, which is already considered an available fuel in terms of production of methanol fueled engines. As we have seen, the order book for such ship types and engines is rapidly growing. On the other side, we have ammonia and hydrogen, which are still considered possible future alternative fuels, but that require quite some time of pilot projects and development before we can consider them as actual options in large-scale shipping. At the same time, Safety concerns like toxicity for ammonia and high flammability for hydrogen are on the top of the agenda of the regulators on the effort to include these two fuels in the alternative fuel options. But even if we manage to have an engine and a ship running on a fuel, the fuel needs to be commercially available to the market so that the fuels can use it to sail around the world. To do so, each fuel needs to climb the fuel evolution stairway, starting from research project, pilot project, and then to small-scale shipping, and possibly elevating to the levels of deep-sea shipping and large-scale application. To do in that way, the fuel can achieve having global or at least regional availability depending on the needs, a supply and bunker infrastructure, and of course a competitive price in the market. Keep in mind that for LNG it took around 20 years to climb all these steps, but taking into consideration the IMO targets that we are having now, the pace of this evolution will need to be much faster for the carbon neutral fuels. The third question that we need to wonder about goes away from the ships themselves and from their bunker boards, all the way to the source, to the primary source of energy that produces the fuels to be used. The existing European Union regulations and expectedly IMO greenhouse gas targets will require the so-called well-to-wake carbon neutral fuels, meaning that the fuels that will be used on board the ships will need to come from a carbon neutral fuel supply chain, starting from the primary source of energy all the way through the process of production and eventually the consumption on board the ships. So in this respect, we have three main families of fuels: the biofuels, the electrofuels, and the blue fuels. Biofuels being the fuels that come from biomass, electrofuels being fuels generated by electricity derived from renewable sources of energy, and finally the blue fuels, which are actually the fuels that we are currently using, the fossil-based fuels, in combination with a large-scale carbon capture system on land. Whether this will be the mixture of fuels that we will eventually have in the future will largely depend on the availability of these three families, as well as to which combination of fuel supply chains will be the one with the highest, or not only the one, with the highest potential of greenhouse gas emission reduction. So apparently we will need to shift away from the current straightforward path of fuel production. Nowadays we're having oil, fossil oil, producing fuel oils through its refinery and then consumed in internal combustion engines on board the ships. Later on we will see the development, parallel development of multiple alternative fuel paths, where different kind of primary sources using different processes will produce different kinds of fuels, which finally will be consumed by different energy converters aboard the ships. So in order to meet the greenhouse gas goals and targets for shipping decarbonization, and in order to be able to the vessels to sail in compliance during this whole transition period, we need to be talking about fuel flexibility and bridging of technologies in order to be able, for the existing fleet and the new fleet coming on, to gradually comply with the upcoming requirements, the checkpoints, and the final goal, ship decarbonization. So while elaborating on the alternative fuels, there is one clear key message, that on the road to decarbonization, one cannot go by himself. And we are happy to see that the shipping industry, with its regulators, with its financiers, with charterers and many other organizations, it is actually already positively replying to this call for collaboration. Thank you very much.
Thank you.